So, good morning and welcome to the North Shore Unitarian Church, where our mission is to empower people with greater depth, meaning, and purpose. My name is Leslie Gibbons, and I'm serving as your Sunday service associate today. That's a mouthful. And I'm very pleased to introduce Yette Patterson-Gram this morning. Yette is going to give us our talk today, and she's going to introduce herself more fully later on. But I know that she's a lifetime Unitarian and a member of this congregation, and in fact, a member of our search committee. So we are very pleased to have her today. Now, I find it challenging to navigate through the world, this world of ours that has become so divisive and confusing sometimes, as we're bombarded with conflicting news and distressing images. This must be an especially hard time for parents with young children. I carry a little card in my purse that has our 7 principles on it. These principles remind me of those higher ideals that are my roadmap, my daily roadmap, my GPS, my guide as a Unitarian through the difficult and challenging days. These 7 principles are my centering principles when I veer off course, which happens often. They are 7 of the reasons why I appreciate being in this church and with this congregation. Now, we're a very busy congregation here, many things going on, as always. Please note the announcements in your order of service, but I have several additional ones for you. First of all, today, after the service at 12:15, we hold our annual general meeting to elect our officers for next year's board, to our members of the nominating committee, and to reappoint our lay chaplains. And there's some other business as well. You've all been sent your information packets, and you can register to vote as soon as the tables are set up after the service today. Our opening words this morning are by John Daniel. Among other wonders of our lives, we are alive with one another. We live here in the light of this unlikely world that isn't ours for long. May we spend generously the time we're given. May we enact our responsibilities as thoroughly as we enjoy our pleasures. May we see with clarity. May we seek a vision that serves all beings. May we honor the mysteries surpassing our sight, and may we hold in our hands the gift of good work and bear it forth whole, as we were born forth by a power we praise on this one earth, this homeland of all we love. It's with great pleasure now that I invite Yette Patterson-Gram to deliver our talk this morning. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself first, and this is what we've all been waiting for.
Hello. As has been said, my name is Yette, and I am a third-generation member of this congregation. I grew up in East Vancouver and have grown up through this church as well, through the youth group, and now as an adult sort of joining the rest of the congregation and serving on the search committee this last year, which has been a great gateway to sort of rejoin this community after being away for a while for school. I won't go into who I am a little bit too much more than that, as I'm going to talk about it a lot over the most of the sermon. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak with all of you about my journey and my efforts to live out my Unitarian Universalist values through my work. So just over a year ago, I started my first real grown-up job. the one that I had studied for and gone to university for, and a job that was the beginning of my career. Or that's the way I saw it when I started. Now, I'm not so sure that that can count as the beginning. This journey began much, much longer ago, and so to tell this story, I'm going to have to go much farther back than 1 year. But either way, this was the job that I had been building to. One of the first times preparing for a job interview didn't make me feel sick. I didn't have to make something up about why I wanted to work there and about how this was my life's ambition, because it was. My job, while still only at the entry level, is a perfect and unexpected intersection of the interests that had felt like they were pulling me in too many directions in university. I work for the City of Vancouver as a planning assistant in the engineering department. My branch is working on changing the way that we manage rainwater. Instead of collecting it as quickly as we can into pipes underground and sending it away like waste that we're ashamed of, we are working to get the city to use what's called green infrastructure, plants and soils and engineered structures like green roofs and rain gardens and bioswales to collect our rainwater. We're trying to use it to support the greening of the city and use the greening of the city to clean all of that water. I help with developing policies to help make it happen, and I do a lot of our public engagement and education work, teaching people about cities and rain and the water cycle. And so because so much of what I do is based in linking our human and urban lives to natural systems and cycles, as I reflected on my own journey, I couldn't help but see the water cycle as a metaphor. And so I would like to take you on that journey with me now. Ocean. When you're talking about the water cycle, of course, you can start anywhere. That's kind of the point of it being a cycle. But I am going to start my story with the ocean. As the place where life began, it feels like an appropriate start, teeming with possibilities. My life began near the Pacific Ocean, here in Vancouver. As I mentioned earlier, I am a third-generation member of the NSUC, and while I didn't start attending the church myself until around 6th grade, the principles of our faith filled the water where I swam. My favorite of the principles, the 7th, has been one I have always felt in my bones. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. I've always felt that connection. My mom likes to tell the story of how when I was a child, it always took us forever to walk somewhere after a rain, because I would stop at every worm on the sidewalk and carefully lift it back onto the grass, away from the sun and all the hungry crows. I also remember the heartache I felt every time we drove by a clear cut on our way to a campsite. I would cry and ask my parents why anyone would do such a thing. I felt so deeply connected to those forests that I couldn't understand how someone could treat such an essential part of our community that way. Evaporation. The words for our principles, both the 7th and the rest, I learned when I began attending Sunday school here with Lynn, who shared our story this morning. And I brought them with me as I grew, evaporating, drawing up the many parts of who I might become and what I would carry with me in the water vapor. Like the 5th principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. I got very involved with things I cared about, quite young, and engaged with power structures around me, learning early on to be an active citizen. The clearest memory I have of this is when I was 8 years old. A cement company was proposing to build a new plant, right next to the outdoor community pool in my neighborhood. The pool is in a park right on the waterfront of Burrard Inlet, and the only part of the shore in that area that's accessible to the public. The rest is the port. I was incensed by this proposal and joined my community in strongly opposing the plant. There were lawn signs absolutely everywhere. And then there was a public meeting, some form of town hall where members of the community were invited to speak, and I signed up. I remember I had carefully written a speech for myself, and I had brought a printout with me, much like today. But as I sat listening to the other speakers, I decided that my pre-written speech wasn't good enough, and I improvised. I spoke passionately about air and noise pollution and impacts on birds and humans, and what our lives might be like without our one local access point to the ocean. I don't know how much I had to do with it, but the cement plant was never built. And to my joy, more recently, the Parks Board has enhanced that park and built a salt marsh along the shore, which is much more what that area and that shoreline might have looked like before the port and before the city. The experience has been an example for me of the satisfaction that comes from being an active citizen and taking part in our democratic system. It is something I have carried with me. Condensation. After evaporation, the next stage of the water cycle is condensation. Water vapor forming into raindrops, beginning to form into the self. Unitarian Youth Group, here in this congregation, downstairs in our basement, is where I first got a taste of really living by these principles. The most essential one, then, was the first, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In our youth group, on our committees, and at conferences, we practiced radical inclusivity, inviting everyone to bring their whole strange self and be welcome with us. We weren't perfect at it by any means, but there I learned how to work hard on things in ways that supported my values. We formed committees, but we avoided hierarchy in our decision-making. We worked collaboratively and valued the process as much as the outcomes. And through that process, as I learned to actively recognize my own worth and dignity, all the pieces of my life so far began to form into who I would become. Rain. And then the rains come. The raindrop leaves a cloud which was full of other raindrops very like it, and free falls out to meet the world. On my journey, this stage of life came to be largely about the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The first program I did in university was at Capilano University in North Vancouver. The program is called Global Stewardship, and it is a take on international development with a major focus on preparing us to work in the not-for-profit sector. The program involved a pretty deep dive into a wide variety of subjects, and I learned a great deal. The lesson that has stuck with me the most came from one of the professors who ran the program. Coming from my very well-organized youth group, where crystal clear and participatory processes was what we did best, this professor's classes were a rude awakening. The assignments he gave us never seemed complete, and the directions were always muddy and unhelpful. When we would ask for more information, he, to my great annoyance, would gleefully cry out, "Ambiguity!" and we were left to sort it out on our own. I eventually saw it as a way of preparing us for bosses who will ask us to do things that aren't as well thought out as a school assignment, and that we would need to do the work to figure out how to do that thing well. I have since learned that there was a deeper lesson there too. In fields like those that he was trying to prepare us for, where you are trying new things to solve new problems, you won't know all the answers before you start. The search for truth and meaning truly is about the search. Most of the time, you will only be searching, and learning to move forward in the ambiguity is the only way to move forward at all. After the Global Stewardship Program, I studied urban planning, a practice which historically has been a tool of segregation and oppression, more concerned with beautiful lines on a map than the impact of those highways and towers on human lives. Thankfully, the discipline is getting better. Many of the approaches now promoted within the field line up well with what I learned as a youth about inherent worth and dignity. But the really good thinkers take it even farther, and in admittedly different words, teach us how to use our second principle as a compass through the ambiguity: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. For me, it was learning about urban environmental movements that brought this principle home. Community garden groups, urban ecologists, and guerrilla gardeners are not just part of environmental movements working to restore the interdependent web in urban areas, but they also work towards environmental justice, which is the idea that the benefits and burdens of urban environments should be distributed equally through a city, so that, for example, it is not just the rich neighborhoods who have beautiful parks, and not just the poor who have to live next to polluting and toxic industry. Many lower-income neighborhoods might not have had the social power or the time and money to successfully fight off a cement plant the way my neighborhood did. But the ambiguity creeps in here too. Beautiful parks make property values go up and make neighborhoods more expensive to live in, sometimes displacing longtime residents of historically lower income areas. The path of how to apply my values and principles in my work is not always clear. This need for justice and equity, combined with the ambiguity of urban planning questions, is a big challenge. It's right there in the name. We're supposed to make a plan. And in municipal governments, we aren't well set up to tackle a problem with a solution that contains any uncertainty. Voters expect the city to do the research necessary to make the right decision. But when the climate is changing and our ecosystems are collapsing and our cities are denser than they have ever been before, there is very little research out there to tell you how to build your city. And so for my department, working on how to manage rainwater, it is here that we come to a choice. Sewers or plants? The way that we have built cities so far, when the rains come, they fall on roofs and roads and concrete. They pick up pollutants left behind by our cars and our chemicals, and the water is directed to a storm drain. From there, it enters the pipes, hidden from sight and well out of mind, though its journey is far from over. In Vancouver and in many cities built around the same time, the rainwater goes into the same pipes as our sewage. Most of the time, this combined water goes to the treatment plant and is cleaned and sent out into the ocean off Iona Island. But when the rain is heavier, all that water becomes too much for the pipes. And to avoid flooding, some of it must spill out of outfalls and into our water bodies without treatment. The department where I work is trying to present an alternative. Instead of sewers, which divert the water from its natural path and fill it with toxins, we use plants. We are reconnecting to the interdependent web, using natural systems inside the city. Rain gardens and other green infrastructure collects water where it falls and where it flows across the city, and hold that water on the surface, helping to keep the pipes from overflowing. The plants and the soils absorb that water and draw out pollutants, a natural filter that lets clean water sink slowly down through the soils and back into the groundwater reservoirs below the city. It is a form of biomimicry, of taking inspiration for inventions, engineering, and human creativity from the natural world, which has found a million beautiful ways to do everything we could dream of. We try to no longer separate ourselves as humans in a city, different and separate from nature. We are recognizing that we are part of the greater ecosystem and larger water cycle. Eventually, some of that water may make it into the Fraser River, or Burrard Inlet, or English Bay, in an approximation of the journey it may have taken here ages ago. I hope that someday it will be enough to keep those water bodies clean for all of us who rely on them, from the tiniest plankton to salmon, seals, orcas, and us. I hope to help give life back to the ocean, which gives life to all of us. What has been interesting to realize over these last few months is that it isn't just what I do for work and why I do it that ties into my UU principles. It's also about how I do my work. Creating a city that manages its water with greenery is a meaningful and value-driven ambition. But I could certainly do the same work in a way that is purely about engineering and landscape architecture that gets the water where it needs to go and no more. But to be a UU and to live my values out in the world, I must ask more of myself. The work we are doing requires collaboration, and it will require a deep reorganization of how the city does business. This means we will need to work gently with people through a major change. We could stick with a well-recognized approach in office environments and just get the boss to tell everyone what to do and make them do it because they have to. Or we could recognize the inherent worth of our colleagues who are less certain that this is the way forward and give them some dignity in making a choice. We can assume their good intentions and be compassionate in our work with them to reconnect to the interdependent web. We can help them on their search for truth and meaning and give them the chance to become a real partner in making the city better. We can see each other as people rather than competition and sit together in the sea of uncertainty and ambiguity to build a solution that works for everyone. And chances are it will be better than anything I could have come up with on my own. This isn't easy, of course, and I don't always succeed. Some days are better than others, but the more I try, the more good days I have. And as we learned in the story that Lynn shared today, even small efforts can make a big difference. And it's worth it, I think. By trying to work in a way that celebrates my values, I will be creating spaces for more people to learn that there are other ways of looking at the world and other ways of working with one another. I hope my efforts can be the catalyst for those I work with to contemplate their own journey and discover the next stages of their own water cycle. To that end, I'd like you to settle yourself in your seat for a moment. Get comfortable. If you'd like, close your eyes. Ground yourself through your seat and through the soles of your feet. Notice your breath and the beating of your heart, the pump that moves the water of your blood. The water cycles through your body as it cycles through the world and as we journey through our lives. These words come from Julia Whitty in her book, Deep Blue Home. She writes, 2,000 years after the Titan Oceanus ruled the waves, modern oceanography confirms what the Greeks knew, that the globe is indeed encircled by an ocean river far more powerful than any Nile or Amazon. This Mobius-like ribbon rises and falls, stirring the waters of the world from their sunlit surfaces to their abyssal depths, a rasa combining the power of atmosphere and ocean, assembling waves in air and water that build and unbuild shorelines, carrying even to the landlocked hearts of continents, keeping the earth wet and alive. In modern parlance, rasa is known as the ocean conveyor belt, or technically the thermohaline circulation, from the Greek therme for heat and halos, sea salt. Whatever the name, it is the deep vascular system of our planet. It brings warmth to the cool extremities of the earth, uniting our arbitrarily divided oceans: Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, Arctic, Southern, into one ecumeny, one world ocean, empowering the atmosphere, watering the land, and enabling life as we know it. Where are you in your water cycle? Do you swim in a vast ocean? Are you water vapor, evaporating and taking up the pieces of who you will become next? Are you condensing, forming into a cloud? Are you ready to rain, to go out into the world and see where you land? Are you making your journey back to the sea? Or are you all of these at once? Where will the water take you next? And how might our UU principles keep you afloat?